So if you have your Bibles, make your way over to John chapter 13. And as Jesus begins this Last Supper, he is going to do something. He's going to teach what we're going to see in chapter 13. For you note takers in the room, if you have your companion guide, he is going to show us today 3 important life lessons. I mean, these life lessons from John 13 are critical for his followers. And so let's jump in and see what Jesus has to teach us today from John chapter 13. Verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of the world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And so right here in verse 1, yet again, Jesus is making mention that his hour has arrived. All throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus would say his hour has not yet come. His hour has not yet come. And now Jesus is letting us know his hour has arrived. And the hour that he is referring to, what that is it's a reference to the cross. Jesus knows he's going to die. This is not a mystery to him. Jesus is not in the dark. So the hour to come is the cross. The hour to come is Calvary. Jesus is going to lay down his life for humanity. He's going to die on behalf of humanity, and he is going to satisfy the wrath of God. That's his purpose. And he knows it. He's not in the dark. Passover is coming. The real Passover has finally arrived. And at the very end of verse 1, I want you to not just listen to this verse again. He says, having loved his own who are in the world, he loved them to the end. Don't just fly over that verse. In fact, what I would say is that for some of you in this room, dare I say all of us in this room, but particularly some of you right now, you need to cling to this verse. You need to hear this verse. You need to know this verse. Having loved his own, he loved them to the end. Right? He loved them, you could say he loved them to the uttermost. Right? This is the infinite act of love. This is the radical love of God being displayed. There is no higher expression of love to be displayed than this. Like the cross, the hour that's coming, like the love of God can't be demonstrated any greater. The love of God can't be utilized or seen in any greater degree. He is going to give up his life. That's why the Apostle Paul in Romans 8 says, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how can he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? It's like the ultimate demonstration of God's love for you. And so if you're sitting here today, the reason I said, let this verse cover you, cling to you, because I know there are people in this room and listening online and they sense like, does God really love me? Yes, he loves you. He's loved you to the end, to the uttermost. Put your name in that. He has loved your name to the very end. You can't go any further. God can't demonstrate his love any better than what he's about to do to his son. Because Jesus, he came to Jesus from the highest place came to the lowliest place. Why? So that the vilest and the worst of all people could experience the greatest of all blessings. That's how great his love is for us. That he who came from heaven, the highest and greatest of all places, came to the lowest place so that we who are sinners, we who are broken, we who are vile, could actually experience the very blessing and the goodness of God. Maybe to say it a little bit differently is that the Creator became a criminal so that criminals, real criminals, could actually be converted into children of God. That's his love for us. One theologian, I think it was R.C. Sproul, said, he said it this way, the covenant maker became the covenant breaker, so that covenant breakers might be seen as covenant keepers. That's how marvelous our God is. That is the depth of his love. And so in verse 2, during supper, at this Last Supper, when the devil had already put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. And so what John is showing us yet again is that Jesus knows that he's going to be betrayed. Jesus is not in the dark. Jesus is not unaware of what's going to transpire. And so, in other words, we're meant to see over and over and over again, it's like the crucifixion of Jesus is not it's not God's plan B. He was foreknown before the foundations of the world to be manifest at this time for this purpose. That's what Peter tells us. So John is just reminding us that this isn't an accident. Jesus isn't in the dark. He is purposeful. And he knows exactly what he's going to do. Verse 3, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. It's like, yet again, Jesus is not unaware. Jesus is not in the dark. And so knowing what is about to transpire, that he is going to die. In just a few hours, he's going to be betrayed. He's going to be handed over. And we'll pick up the narrative like in chapter really 18, 19. But 13 through 17 is just this discourse of what's happening in this upper room. And so he's not in the dark. And so he's going to show us now, as he's gathering his disciples in the upper room, he's going to teach us something. 3 critical lessons that we see starting in John 13, verse 4. And he's going to use, for many of us that we're very familiar with, he's going to use foot washing. Right? He's going to wash his disciples' feet. This is one of those events, even for people maybe who didn't even grow up in the church, like you probably have heard that, Jesus washes his disciples' feet. And to be honest, when it came to John chapter 13, Jesus' foot washing and his disciples, it's like I wasn't all that excited. Like for a lot of us, it's such a familiar story. And just to be frank, feet are gross. Right? There's just something about feet that's just not gross. They're just gross. The only feet that aren't gross are little baby feet. Right? Every other feet, once you start walking, it's just not pleasant, especially guy feet, right? Like knuckle hair, toenail fungus, warts. Okay, I've probably gone too far, but it's just gross. And yet Jesus is going to wash his disciples' feet. And in this foot washing, we do get some critical life lessons from Jesus. And here's the first one. Jesus' foot washing is a symbolic lesson for you and I. It's a symbolic lesson to his disciples. It's a symbolic lesson on what he's about to do. Remember what he's already told us. Right? His death is imminent. In just a few hours, he's going to be handed over. He knows he is going to die. His hour has arrived. And so he's going to give, just before this handing over where he's going to be crucified, he's going to give his disciples a very memorable, symbolic lesson. It's a symbolic act on what Jesus will do. It's going to show that he does love to the end. His love is to the uttermost. In verse 4, let's see this symbolic lesson. And Jesus rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments. Taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured out water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and wipe them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Now, in verses 4 and 5, just what I want you to notice just real quickly, just if you scan those two verses, you notice like all the verbs that you're seeing. There's a lot of action that's happening in those two verses. He rises, he lays aside his outer garment, he's taking a towel, he's tying it around his waist, he's pouring, he's wiping, he's wrapping. And so there's a lot of action that you're seeing. But also in verses 4 and 5, this is a very lowly act. What Jesus is about to do for his disciples is not just a lowly act, it is an act of a servant. This is what servants would do. They would be the ones who would wash feet. But what Jesus is illustrating here is that this lowly act is not being accomplished by a lowly person, is it? This lowly act, this act of a servant, is actually being done. It's being accomplished by a great person, an elevated person. In fact, a master, the rabbi, by God. The God of the universe right here is going to serve lowly, unclean people. This is a huge deal. I mean, it's not just huge in his time, it's like huge in our time. Have you ever noticed, like, really great people, rich people, dignified people, powerful people are not known for serving? It's just not the reality. If you have a lot of money, you typically see rich people, dignified people, powerful people serving. And yet, that's what's happening. They're being served. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But something more significant is happening, just the example of service. Right? Something in verse 4 is happening that Jesus, he's like, I don't want you to miss it. And to be honest, for years, I have missed it. Jesus is showing his disciples, he is showing us today a very powerful symbolic lesson. Just kind of go back to verse 4 and 5 and notice what's happening. This is what the master is doing. What is the master doing? The master is laying aside his robe. He's laying aside his garment, and what is he doing? He's taking on a towel of a servant. And as he takes on this towel, what does he do? He takes this towel and he's going to use that towel to remove the filth of these men. Now, incidentally, so he's going to wipe and he's going to clean their feet. And that towel that he uses to wipe and clean their feet, he will actually discard later, never to be seen. Right? He's going to take that towel and he's going to clean them. And you know what he doesn't do with that towel is something that, like you and I was just like, what do we do with towels, especially men? We can use towels in inappropriate ways. We could use towels, like after he cleans his feet, you know what he doesn't do? He doesn't twist that towel and that's not what he does. He doesn't take the towel and then he doesn't lift it up and he doesn't put it in their face, look how dirty you are. It's not what Jesus does. He cleans them, removes the towel from their presence, and what does he do when it doesn't tell us explicitly, but we see it. When he's done, what does he do? He will stand up and he will put his robe back on. So do you see what Jesus is doing in verses 4 and 5? It's powerful. It is a powerful symbolic lesson. It's a higher level lesson that John just repeatedly shows throughout the gospel. Remember he says, tear down this temple, I'll raise it up. He wasn't referring to a little temple. He was saying, tear down this body, I will raise it up. You think this water is going to satisfy you? I am the living water. You think this bread that I multiply is going to nourish you? I am the bread of life. And yet again, there's this higher level symbolic teaching that Jesus is showing us in these two verses. And so in case you missed it, it's Jesus, the God of the universe. What does he do? He's not just the God of the universe, he's the great master. and he's willing to take off his greater garment. And what does he do? He puts on the towel of a servant. And he takes on this towel. Why? So that he can clean the filth of man. And when he is done doing that, what does he do? He will rise up and he will put on his glorious nature again. So do you see the symbolic lesson that he is teaching his disciples? It's powerful, folks. He knows his hour is coming. And here this foot washing is a symbolic lesson of what? His incarnation. It's a symbolic lesson of his death. He knows he's going to die, and his resurrection. I wonder when Paul writes to the Philippians if he actually doesn't have this in mind when that creed is being formed. Remember when in Philippians chapter 2, he says, Jesus, who being the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. The good old King Jimmy says, did not consider the equality of God something to be thought robbery, but empties himself, taking the very nature of a servant, being found in human likeness. And he'll humble himself and become obedient to the cross. And then afterwards, what do we see? And God exalted him to the highest name and gave him the name that is above every name. And so we see the resurrection being described as well. And so Jesus, right here, he's teaching his followers in this upper room a very symbolic lesson of what he's about to do in just a few hours. He is demonstrating to them, I am and I do love you to the end. I love you to the uttermost. Love you to the uttermost. Why would he do this? I mean, this is the glory of the gospel. Why does Jesus do this? It's because Jesus understands and Jesus knows that if we're going to go to heaven, if we're going to be in God's presence, we have to be cleansed. We need a cleansing. And we don't get cleansed, and we don't get forgiven, and we will not be right with God, like have a right standing before God out of our own service and by our own works. We are going to be saved, we are cleansed, and we are forgiven by what? By the service of another. That's our great master. This is what we trust in. This is what we are looking to. He is the one who removes our filth. He is the one who cleanses us. This is our hope. We trust this. As Christians, this is what we trust in. Now, Jesus is doing something else, though. Jesus' foot washing is more than just a symbolic lesson. He has another life lesson for us. This is the second one. Look at Jesus' foot washing is actually a theological lesson for you and I. He's going to give us a theological truth on just what he's about to do. And we pick that up starting in verse 6. Look what Jesus says. Jesus came now to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Does Peter understand what Jesus is doing? Nope, not at all. And to be honest, nor would we have. He doesn't understand that his master is going to be almost handed over here pretty soon, and he's going to be crucified. Peter has no idea what's going on. And so I'm not asking you to do this, but kind of do this, especially if you have a companion guide. Maybe don't mark out do you wash my feet, but maybe put above it, maybe this question. Lord, ultimately what Peter's saying is what are you doing? He says do you wash my feet? But ultimately he's Lord, what are you doing? And because Peter doesn't understand. And the reason I say what are you doing is because I want us to just for a second put yourself into Peter's shoes and just ask that question. It's we often have no idea what God is doing in our lives. Are you going through a problem right now? It could be a health problem. It could be a relationship problem. It could be an emotional problem. It could be a financial problem. And let's just be honest, like it's easy for us to read this narrative like, oh, Jesus is about to do something great. Peter doesn't know that. And so I would just say, like, whatever problem that you're facing right now, maybe you need to ask, like you're probably like Peter, like, God, what are you doing? What are you doing? To which I would say, he is doing something. And he's not confused. He is always purposeful, which is why I would say, if you're confused, maybe confused on what's going on in your life, I would say, oh, can you trust him? I know how hard it is, and it's not meant to be trite, but I would encourage you, trust him. Trust him. Why? Because of verse 1, he loves you to the uttermost. He does. He sees where you're at. He knows where you're at. And he's not confused, even though you might be. So trust him. Trust him because he does love you. And notice what Jesus says. He says, Jesus answered Peter, what I am doing, which is why I said, like when he says, basically, what are you doing, Jesus? Jesus says, what I am doing, you don't understand now. But afterwards, you will understand. Peter, you don't understand what I'm doing, but I promise you, a time is coming where you will understand, and I am for you. I am doing something purposeful and something great. And so this lesson that Jesus is going to use with this foot washing is not just a symbolic lesson of the master taking off his robes and becoming a servant to cleanse and then standing back up and putting on his garments yet again. There is a theological lesson that Jesus is also teaching us. And so notice how Peter responds to Jesus wanting to wash him. How does he respond? Verse 8, Peter said to Jesus, you shall never wash me. Does Peter like the idea that Jesus is going to wash his feet? Not at all. Nope, sorry, Jesus. You're never, ever going to wash me. Peter does not want Jesus to cleanse him. It's beneath Jesus. Right? Jesus has no business serving him. But in reality, like Peter's response is really the response of the majority of humanity. Like humanity does not want Jesus to cleanse them. And what does Jesus think about that? That idea that you're not going to let Jesus cleanse you? How does Jesus respond to Peter's answer? And Jesus answered Peter, if I don't wash you, you have no share with me. So do you see what Jesus is doing? I mean, he is providing a very critical theological lesson. Jesus is saying, if you don't let me wash you, you have no share with me. If you don't let me cleanse you, there is no inheritance. Do you see the theological lesson that he is teaching his disciples? If you don't let me cleanse you, you cannot be in my presence. If you don't let me wash you, you have no share and you have no inheritance. That's a massive theological lesson. And how does Peter respond? Peter is like notorious for saying dumb things and doing dumb things, which is so helpful because it's like, I say dumb things. I do dumb things. But right here, that's not one of those times. Look how Peter responds in verse 9. And Simon Peter said to Jesus, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Peter understands and he recognizes like he doesn't want anything to get in the way of fellowship with Jesus. He doesn't want any unhindered access to Jesus. He's like, wash my feet. And when you're done, wash my hands. And when you're done with that, feel free to wash my hair. Like, wash it all. He's like, I want access to you. I want fellowship with you. I want the inheritance, not just with you, but the inheritance that you provide. And Jesus hears Peter's response, and he's going to just continue to drill down on this lesson that he's teaching. Notice what Jesus says in verse 10. And Jesus said to Peter, the one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. It's Jesus' work, when he cleans or cleanses Peter's feet, Jesus, when he cleaned him, he cleaned all of Peter. In other words, Jesus says, what I have done has cleansed you. It is sufficient. Jesus' act that he accomplished is a once for all act. The fundamental cleaning that Jesus has provided is a cleaning that never needs to be repeated, in other words. Not only does it not need to be repeated, it doesn't need to be improved upon. Jesus' action is an all-sufficient merit. What he has done for them, he's saying, that is sufficient. You are clean. You don't have to do anything else. Nothing more is needed. Does Peter understand this? No. Not really. Not fully, not yet. So are you following his lessons? Especially when it comes to this second one, right? He is providing a theological lesson. What's that lesson? Just so we're all on the same page. It's like, it's crucial to know. Here's the lesson. Unless Jesus cleans you, cleanses you, washes you, forgives you, you cannot be in his presence. You don't get to do it. He has done it for you. And so that's the fundamental lesson. And then right underneath it, he wants to make sure also you are clear is that it's important to know that cleansing can't be improved upon. Right? It doesn't need to be repeated. He doesn't need to clean your feet again. And nor does it need to be improved upon. He doesn't need to clean other things, your hands and your head. It is a once for all action. There is no cleansing without going through him. You can't be clean before God unless Jesus does it for you. That's the gospel message. That's the glorious truth of Christianity. All other religions outside of Christianity is like, what must I do in order to be clean before God? Do I need to follow an eightfold path? Do I need to do the 5 pillars? Do I need to keep law? And so on and so on. It's what must I do to be cleansed, to be forgiven, to have this right standing before God? And Jesus says, I have to do it for you. It's through me. That's the theological lesson that his disciples need to know, and I would say we need to know. And we need to teach that to our kids. Well, when our kids were really, really small, we would make them eat all of their dinner. And what horrible parents we are. And by really all of their dinner, why? Because at the end of every dinner in the Haugh household, we need dessert. It's just one of those things we have to have. I'm sorry, I have a massive sweet tooth, and so it's I am looking for dessert at the very end. It is the inheritance that I want. And so our kids knew at a very young age, it's if maybe they didn't have to eat everything in order to get desserts. Well, it's nope, you need to eat everything. And it wasn't an exorbitant amount, right? It was just eat these 3 peas and 2 carrots. And you too could have this glorious goodie at the end. Now, this divine decree came from their mother who was in heaven, right? She's the one that created these standards. If you want the goodie, eat what's everything on the plate. Now, inevitably, right, one of them would begrudgingly eat it and then sit with joy, knowing that dessert is coming. They did it. The other would weep, right? There would be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why? Because it's like they just could not meet that standard. It was just too high for them, too big. They just could not choke down those two little vegetables. And I remember that one day, I was like, Ben, distraught that his little sister could not get the dessert. She's weeping and crying, and he just starts, as a little lawyer, as little lawyers can do, began to rationalize with the divine decree, with mama, saying, would you just compromise your standards? Let her have, right, this dessert. Mom couldn't compromise her standards. She wouldn't compromise her standards. But what did Ben do? Ben said, can I do for Abby what Abby can't do for herself? He didn't say it in those exact words, but I like that. He did say, can I eat her vegetables for her? And we're like, I remember we just like looked at each other and we're like, yeah, you can. You can do for her what she cannot and will not do for herself. Now that analogy, this breaks down significantly because Ben is not Jesus. But we took that situation as like guys, that's the gospel. That Jesus will do for you what you cannot and will not do for yourself. And so Jesus is teaching his disciples these important lessons. It's more than just a symbol of the master laying aside his glory and taking on the towel of a servant and cleaning and then rising to take on his garment again. That's a powerful symbolic lesson. And he's also providing a very theological lesson. That if you cannot stand in my presence unless you are cleansed. And that can't happen if you don't let me. I am the one, and I'm the only one who will clean you. And then our last one, real quick, is that Jesus' foot washing is a very personal lesson. Very practical lesson. I'm going to do it real quick because we could be here all day. Verse 11, for he knew, meaning Jesus knew who was about to betray him. That is why he said, not all of you are clean. Jesus knows that he is going to be betrayed, and he's going to be betrayed by one of his disciples. He knows that he's going to be betrayed by Judas. Jesus knows it. Does the other disciples know it? No, they don't. They're clueless. They have no idea that Judas is going to betray him. He makes you wonder, did Judas lose his appetite right after Jesus says these words? And so it's a reminder here in verse 11, again, Jesus is not surprised. He knows and he sees. And so here's the practical or the personal lesson. Did Jesus wash Judas's feet? Yes, he did. Jesus washed Judas's feet, but it was not personally received. That cleansing was not received by Judas. In other words, Peter says, clean my feet. He received it. Clean my hands and my head also. Judas does not personally receive it like Peter does. Judas's feet were washed, but his heart is alienated to God. His heart is far from Jesus, which causes me to reflect a little bit. I can't reflect too long, got to keep going, but it's you can go through all types of religious motions, religious activities. You can come, you can receive communion, you could even be baptized and do all these religious works. And it's like, do you really believe? Have you embraced him? Have you trusted him? Because Judas didn't believe. He was a fraud. And I wish I had more time to unpack. Like, how do we know? Like, maybe some of you are like, well, is that me? Like, how do I know if my faith is genuine? And I'm just going to say, just for real quickly, some of the reasons that you will know your faith is genuine. Here are two ways that I would say you can know that your faith is actually genuine. One is, how do you feel about your sin? Do you see it like, man, I have a sin problem. I actually feel bad for the things that I do that I know are wrong. That's an indicator that your faith is genuine. Another indicator would be like, how do I know that my faith is genuine? Like, what are you ultimately trusting in? Are you trusting in your own religious works, your own efforts, your own earning? Or are you saying, you know what, God, I am fully trusting in you. The only way that I'm going to stand in your presence is because you have cleansed me. You have washed me, and you have forgiven me, and you have shown me that you have loved me to the uttermost. And so Judas doesn't respond the way Peter responds. He doesn't personally receive it. And the one that I didn't put, but we do see, there is a fourth lesson. It is more the practical lesson or the example. Oftentimes when we talk about washing Jesus, is like Jesus washing the disciples' feet, what do we think of? Like, what's our example? We need to be servants too. And that's true. And we see that even in these verses. If you just scan down to verse 13, you see that as an example. This one's free. This is free for you folks. It's not in. But he says, you call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and teacher, washed your feet, you ought to also wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should also do as I have done to you. And so you see all that. There's so many lessons that Jesus is teaching us as his followers. And that last one that I didn't even give you is the one that we all know, is that we are called to be an example, that we also serve. I quoted that verse from Philippians earlier, that Jesus, who being in the form of man, did not consider equality with God, but became a servant, taking on the very nature of a servant, being formed in likeness, like 6 and 7, 8. What's the verse that Paul quotes right before that creed? In verse 5, he says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. That we are called to live just like him. And so we are called to serve. So are you a servant? That's another lesson. And we're going to take that right into communion together. But before I pray, my prayer is there anyone here that has not trusted Jesus to cleanse you, to forgive you? Oh, that you would just ask him and thank him like he loves you to the uttermost. And he wants to cleanse you. You can't clean yourself. He wants to cleanse you. And as easy as just confessing, Jesus, I need you. I need your cleansing. I need your forgiveness. I need your newness of life. And I'll pray, and then we're going to actually celebrate communion together. So, Father in heaven, thank you that you have demonstrated your love towards us, that even while we were sinners and rebels, that Christ died for us. You have shown your great love for us, that you have laid aside your glory, that Jesus came, laid aside his glory, took on humanity, has cleansed us, and has actually risen from the dead and given us his righteousness and goodness. If there's anyone here, Spirit of God, I pray, that does not know you, direct their hearts to Jesus. for the newness of life that he offers. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.